Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about chapter 5 on rhetoric. We're going to finish up the rhetorical devices. We'll talk about demagoguery. So, on to continuing our discussion of rhetorical devices, proof surrogates. This is one of the most important of the rhetorical devices for you to know. So, a proof surrogate is a phrase inserted into a claim that suggests there's evidence or support for that claim without actually specifying what that evidence is, right? So you've heard millions of these in your life, right? Everybody knows that. It's common knowledge that informed people say. It's widely believed that everyone knows that again, right? That's the most common one, right? When people say that, they're strongly suggesting that there's evidence for the claim, but when you press them to produce it, they'll balk, right? In fact, what's happening is that they're assuming that such support exists, but they don't have it, right? So again, be very wary of proof surrogates. Studies show, that's another good one, right? Here we go. There's a good example of this on page 148. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and this is referencing Quebec, which is the French-speaking part of Canada. They had a referendum on independence that was rejected. So this is from the Wall Street Journal editorial. We hope politicians on this side of the border are paying close attention to Canada's referendum on Quebec. Canadians turned out en masse to reject the referendum. There's every reason to believe that voters in the U.S. are just as fed up with the social engineering that lumps people together as groups rather than treating them as individuals. The proof surrogate there is there's every reason to believe. Well, if there is every reason to believe, show us the polls, show us the surveys, right? Here's another one from that same page. The Great Depression in the 1930s was needlessly prolonged by government policies which are now recognized in retrospect as foolish and irresponsible, right? Now recognized in retrospect by whom? Top economists? Who recognized these policies as foolish? And that was from Thomas Sowell, who's a syndicated conservative columnist. The next rhetorical device, repetition. Repetition is exactly what it sounds like. You just say the same thing over and over and over. Not to step on anybody's political toes, but during the impeachment hearings, when President Trump kept saying that the impeachment was a hoax or a fraud, that's what that was. Repetition. Just say it over and over again until everyone stops questioning it, right? And actually, that's a really good segue into what we have to talk about next, which isn't exactly pleasant. That's demagoguery. Demagoguery is the use of the emotional aspects of language to foster hate, right? Hatred of foreigners, of minority groups. It doesn't matter. But what a demagogue wants to do is to stir up the worst aspects of us, right? To get us to hate a specific group. And they do it for their own political advantage, right? And they use a lot of techniques, right? So the first technique they use is otherizing. Otherizing is just what it sounds like. It separates humanity into two groups, us and them. And obviously, most of us hearing this would want to be on the side of us rather than them. There was actually an old 1950s horror movie about giant ants called Them, right? But we learned, right, back in chapter 1 about the dangers of the cognitive biases, the in-group bias, right, the fundamental attribution error, right, and all of these demagogic techniques, they play on that. Human beings are still hardwired to be tribal. And this is, if you ever wonder why immigrants get treated so badly, and not just in the U.S., but in most places, it's because we're hardwired again to think like this, and it takes a lot of effort to overcome that. So beware of otherizing. The second technique is demonizing, and demonizing is exactly what it sounds like, trying to make someone or something sound like it's evil, right? Often it's immigrants. Sometimes, in the United States, it's gays. Gays have a gay agenda, right? Beware of demonizing. Is it fostering xenophobia? Xenophobia is the hatred of foreigners, right? So fostering xenophobia is trying to encourage the hatred of foreigners. And that can be as simple as you go to a small town, you hear somebody say, look at them, you can tell they're not from around here. That's xenophobia. right? And again, demagogues are very good at fostering xenophobia, right? And lastly, fear and hate mongering, which is again just like it sounds like, right? Just it's being used to encourage you to hate someone or something, whatever it is that the demagogue wants to see gone, whatever is going to advance their political power once that group is gone or has been marginalized, right? And here's an example. This is from the Nazi minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, who he wasn't a moron. The man had a PhD in literature. The man was intelligent, but he was a demagogue par excellence. And this is a speech that he gave trying to justify the Holocaust. Quote, when Miss Bromsig or Miss Nerderich, and those are just common German names, feel pity for an old woman wearing the Jewish star, they should remember that a distant nephew of this old woman by the name of Nathan Kaufman sits in New York City and has prepared a plan by which all Germans under the age of 60 will be sterilized. They should recall that the son of her distant uncle is a warmonger named Baruch or Morgenthau or Untermeyer, who stands behind Mr. Roosevelt, driving him to war, and if they succeed, a fine but ignorant U.S. soldier may one day shoot dead the only son of Mr. Bromsig or Miss Nerderich. It will all be for the benefit of Jewry, to which this old woman also seems, no matter how fragile and pitiable she may seem. So gang, not only does that particular passage, that speech, incorporate all of the demagogic techniques that we just talked about, but it's also a conspiracy theory. You know, a lot of people think that conspiracy theories are, funny or at least interesting and entertaining, right? Conspiracy theories are dangerous. And again, Goebbels had one there where he was espousing a conspiracy theory that Jews are trying to hatch a plan to sterilize Germans. Beware of demagogues, beware of conspiracy theories, and never was that advice more true than in an election year.